Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it is expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a bike or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launching. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney, the Viking Shortridge. I want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal questions or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922, or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal. Well, tonight our special guest is Ken Gerhard. He is widely recognized cryptozoologist and author who frequently appears on television. Ken has traveled the world searching for evidence of mysterious creatures, including Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra, giant winged creatures, and even werewolves. In addition, he has written 4 books on the subject of unknown animals, and his research has been featured on numerous TV shows, including Missing in Alaska, Monster Quest, Ancient Aliens, Legend Hunters, and Unexplained Files. He's appeared on major networks, including the History Channel, Animal Planet, Discovery, Syfy, National Geographic, and the Science Channel. Currently, he's featured on the Travel Channel series In Search of Monsters. His new book just came out recently titled The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, which can be found on Amazon along with his other books. So, with no further ado, let me click him over. Let's welcome Mr. Ken Gerhard. Thank you so much, for coming on the show. It's such an honor to have you tonight discuss, your research and the hard work that you're doing.
Well, good evening, Rodney. It's an honor to be speaking with you this evening. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you, sir. Like I said, it's such an honor to have you on. But I know your time is limited, so I'll dive right on in here. And could you give us a little bit more, information about yourself? What is a cryptozoologist, and what started you on the path to become a cryptozoologist and seeking out, the mysteries of cryptids?
Well, cryptozoology comes from the words crypto, meaning hidden, and zoology, of course, is the study of animals. So it's technically the study of hidden animals, and what that means is that cryptozoologists search out and investigate evidence of unknown animals, animals that are not recognized by science. And it's actually, there's a wide range of cryptids, as we call them, but the most common or the most popular ones in terms of popular culture, of course, are things like Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Mothman, Jersey Devil, so on and so forth. So my interest has been kind of lifelong, Rodney. I just, like a lot of people my age, I was heavily influenced in the 70s by, Bigfoot TV shows and the original In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy and Legend of Boggy Creek, great Bigfoot movie, and of course saw the Patterson-Gimlin film, Bigfoot film, when I was very young, and so it's just been a lifelong obsession. But what I always tell people is that I've been very fortunate in my life. Growing up, my mother was a travel agent, and she was very supportive of my interest in these things, and so we traveled around the world, and I got to go to some pretty amazing places, including Loch Ness in Scotland when I was 15 years old, and that's when I attempted my first crack at being a cryptozoologist. I was hiking around the lake with a little 8mm movie camera. I was interviewing the locals and just trying to gather information. So it's just been kind of a lifelong passion and interest for me. I feel very blessed to have had many of the opportunities I've had.
Well, I understand that. That's awesome, because I know when I was growing up, we was talking about In Search Of and all these. I watched them too, so that's what got me on the paranormal trail. So I understand that.
You're not old enough to have seen In Search Of back in the day. You must have started with Unsolved Mysteries in the 80s or 90s, right?
I wish. I'm 50 years old. I wish.
50 is the new 30, my friend. We're fine.
That's right. It might say 50, but I feel 90. Well, within your research, what are some of the strangest cryptids that you have researched, and why?
Well, I always have to make an explanation to people, which is that for many years, cryptozoology, and it's a field that dates back to the 1950s and perhaps before, the field of cryptozoology typically focuses on things in the zoological realm, in the animal kingdom. So in terms of things like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, the Yeti, those things could actually viably exist. And in fact, some of them should exist because the descriptions match with known animals or they're similar to known animals. But there's another kind of fringe area in cryptozoology where we investigate some really weird creatures like the Mothman, Dogman, Chupacabra, Jersey Devil, Goatman, and a lot of those kind of things, they don't make any zoological sense. The descriptions are just too weird, and the behaviors and all those things. But we do investigate them because they have animal-like characteristics, and some of them may in fact be connected to unknown animals, perhaps things, and some of the descriptions are embellished or misinterpreted. So some of the weirdest ones, man, there have been some weird ones through the years. I got to probably think about that. Mothman's pretty weird I know it's very well known, but when you consider like any type of flying humanoid, a human-like form with wings and arms and giant glowing red eyes that flies 100 miles an hour, chases cars, and, of course it has all those other weird elements of UFO sightings in the area and the men in black showing up to intimidate eyewitnesses and the tragedy of the bridge collapse, curses and conspiracies. So that's a pretty weird story. Chupacabra is, another similar type of thing where there's all these descriptions of these weird, unearthly creatures feeding on livestock in a vampire-like fashion. So that's pretty strange stuff. And, of course, Dogman's really become immensely popular. There's many websites and podcasts and things, and people are reporting seeing these half-man, half-canid type creatures, kind of like werewolf-type things popping up everywhere now. So those are some of the weird ones, but some of the obscure weird ones I like are, something called the Loveland Frog, which is like a half-frog, half-man that's been reported from Loveland, Ohio. I've gotten, believe it or not, a couple of reports of a pig man, half pig. Not too many of those, but those popped up. That's pretty weird stuff. So, occasionally I get those kind of really strange things, but, they're not as prevalent or common as things like Bigfoot and lake monsters and black panthers, things like that.
Well, have you found within your research, like with the Bigfoot, you got the Yeti on the other part of the planet, have you found other cryptos similar to that, let's say similar to the Mothman, maybe something like that in China?
Oh, you mean like some of the weird cryptids? Are there worldwide reports? Is that what you're asking me? They're spread around like Bigfoot and Yeti? Okay. I got you. Yeah. I mean, flying humanoids, which I consider Mothman a flying humanoid. I actually wrote a book called Encounters with Flying Humanoids, and it really looks at the global phenomenon, because even though most people have heard of Mothman from West Virginia, there are many accounts of similar creatures from Mexico and England, all over the United States, Russia, Asia, so on and so forth. So, I mean, the descriptions are a little bit different from place to place, but people are essentially describing something like Mothman, a human-like being with wings and, seemingly very weird characteristics and attributes. So that's one example. Dogman has kind of spread all over the globe. Originally, we had Dogman legends from Michigan and something from Wisconsin called the Beast of Bray Road, which was kind of a Dogman, and then all of a sudden, through the years, now we've got sightings all over North America, South America, Africa, Australia. So Dogman has become a worldwide kind of thing, which, but I don't view that as an animal that's spread all over the planet. That's yet, I think, another line of evidence that it's not an animal, but it's some type of other paranormal, supernatural manifestation or something beyond our realm of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there a difference between the Dogman and a werewolf?
Well, that's an interesting question. It seems like you ask most Dogman enthusiasts, and it's a very polarizing question. Many people say, "Oh, yeah, they're the same thing." I mean, werewolf, were is German for man, and a wolf and a dog have only been genetically separated for about 30,000 years. So, I mean, it's basically a Dogman, is what you're saying. And then others say, no, the Dogman is very different. It's more human-like, or, it has other characteristics. Now, it should be pointed out that the traditional werewolves, from the medieval times and up until the 15th, 16th century, were not described as upright walking dogmen. They were typically described as merely being wolf-like, running around on all four legs, but usually bigger than a wolf. Sometimes they had human-like eyes. Sometimes they were lacking a tail. But they always were very vicious and, attacked and killed many people, and they were associated with witchcraft. And, of course, there were many thousands of people were tortured, and sadly tortured and executed and burned at the stake in Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries for belief that they were either a witch or a werewolf. So that's kind of the traditional thing. So I don't know. In my mind, I think they are connected somehow, because you look at that long history of sightings and accounts, and it's something that's been with us for so long. But, others take the opposite view.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. Oh, well, have they been any that you know of, any like ancient texts or maybe wall paintings, cave paintings that depict these cryptids that you've been researching?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that. So cryptozoology. Sorry, I had to drink a little water.
That's all right.
It's getting kind of dry down here, Rodney. I know it's much colder where you are, but it gets dry down here. So,
I've been
there's
when I used to drive a trailer, so I know how dry it all get down there.
Yeah, I live on the edge of San Antonio in the desert, basically. So it's So pardon me if I have to take a sip here. My throat gets too dry. Okay. Cryptozoology encompasses not only zoology, but many other branches of science and study. For example, cryptozoology is largely based on anecdotal evidence. So that is stories, folklore, myths, legends. I mean, modern sightings too, but, a lot of cryptids do have long traditions in folklore, Native American traditions, and so forth. So in the case of Bigfoot, you have ancient pictographs, rock paintings from California that show what's called the hairy man, a Bigfoot-type creature. There is a bird man, a creature, an anthropomorphic creature that's actually painted in a cave in France, and that's about 11,700 years old, so that's pretty old. And then you have, if you look at some of the first cultures that sprung up around the world, Mothman, flying humanoid-type creatures were talked about in ancient Sumeria, ancient Assyria, ancient Egypt. You had things like Anubis, the jackal-headed god, which is kind of a dog man. Ancient Babylonia, there was a creature painted on a great gate that was known as the Ishtar Gate, and that particular creature looked just like a dinosaur. And so that's a couple thousand years ago, a few thousand years ago, there's paintings of dinosaur-like creatures. That doesn't add up, but that's something that's talked about in cryptozoology. And then even in terms of things like the Loch Ness Monster and Scottish lake monsters, in ancient England, there were these old Celtic renditions of these snake-like creatures, water kelpies, and different things. So you do find a lot of that with many cryptids, where you can go back into different legends and rock paintings and carvings and find basically cryptids, that were being represented centuries ago.
Well, have you got any reports of any cryptids, like in my area in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia?
Well, sure. You have to explain to me. That's a pretty big range, man. So I'm sure things all over. Of course, lots of Bigfoot activity, lots of sightings. In fact, in my new book, I talk about a very credible Bigfoot sighting in the southern Appalachians, right there in western South Carolina. There have been, not a bunch, but lots of sightings of black panthers, which are mysterious big black cats that are not supposed to exist in North America. Those have been sighted throughout the Appalachians. And also thunderbirds, which is something that I specialize in the field of cryptozoology, Thunderbird is, again, a Native American tradition. You can find references in many different tribes and nations around the continent of these giant birds called thunderbirds or super eagles. And I mean like really massive, Rodney, like birds with 15, 20-foot wingspans, something as big as a small airplane. So I have sightings of those from the Appalachians as well. So I think those are probably the main three that kind of jump out at me. You know, Bigfoot, thunderbirds, and black panthers. Those are all pretty prevalent in those regions.
Well, is there anything else you can say more about the thunderbird that you've studied? Because that interests me. Because my kids, when they were younger, they talked about seeing something when they was getting ready to get on the bus, and all four of them swear to me that Daddy, it looked like like some kind of dinosaur bird or something like that. So it didn't even look real, but it was there. Could that possibly be maybe a thunderbird?
Yeah, that's interesting because thunderbirds, there's a sharp division in terms of the physical descriptions. So first of all, I like to point out to people that thunderbirds are probably the forgotten stepchild in the field of cryptozoology because there aren't a lot of people researching or collecting sightings, and aside from myself, and moreover, a lot of people that have seen these things did not realize that what they were seeing was unknown until they saw me on a TV show or read one of my books and thought, holy crap, I saw a bird with a 15-foot wingspan. And because they're not publicized much, people see these birds and they just think, well, dang, that's a huge friggin' bird. But, that's 5 times as big as an eagle. Wonder what kind of bird that is. And they never tell anybody about it. So, but there's 2 descriptions that I get typically in the thunderbird world. One are, more bird-like, covered in feathers, very large, 15, 20-foot wingspan, usually having a hooked beak, which indicates that it's like some kind of raptor, like an eagle or a vulture-like bird, and usually solid color, typically black, but sometimes dark gray or brown or so forth. So that's one type that I get pretty frequently. And the other type describe what you're talking about, which is more of a prehistoric-looking, and in fact not a bird at all, something with wings, but more akin to pterodactyls or pterosaurs, which were giant. Well, they weren't all giant, but they're, a specialized line of flying reptiles that were around for like 150 million years. Maybe more, maybe 200 million years, and they supposedly died out about 65 million years ago, and some of those suckers had wingspans, up to 40 feet across, so they were immense, but didn't have feathers because reptiles don't have feathers, so they did possibly have feather-like covering on their body called pycnofibers, which were basically like primitive feather-like structures. They probably didn't have feathers on their wings because they didn't have bird-like wings. Their wings were more like a bat. It was like a thin, membranous layer of skin that was stretched out across their finger bones. But they were very lightweight, too. Even though they were huge, just like birds, they had kind of hollow bones. So even though they were big, they were like giant kites, basically. But I get a lot of the reports of those as well, which is interesting that I get both types, and they're typically all called thunderbirds. So that's a real mystery, why we have, it's harder to, looking at it, Rodney, from a scientific probability point of view, which I always try to do, the odds of 2 drastically different species of giant winged creatures both having eluded science, that just doesn't make sense, I mean, it's enough of a reach to say that there may be one species or one type, but to say that there's 2 different kinds is pretty incredible.
Well, I know my kids, they're adults now, and they swear by what they saw. All 4 of them. I mean, and I believe them. I know they saw something, and I haven't doubted what they saw. And but they'll tell you pterodactyls one that my son. That's what he described it as, and my daughter said, like a lizard in the sky, like a dinosaur they've seen in TV. So, yeah. Wow.
Well, you should, if they get a chance, I'd love for them to put together just a very brief description of their sighting and send that to me just to put in my kind of files here, because, Maybe I can find some other sightings around that time period in that area or something that would corroborate that. That would be cool.
Okay, I sure will. I'll get them. I'll get them all to do that.
Yeah, no pressure, but as a researcher, it's my job. I got to collect that. If someone says they've seen something, I want to put that in the database and see if we can investigate that some more.
Okay, sure will. Next question is, what is your opinion that maybe most cryptic sightings could possibly be, paranormal or spiritual sightings, or maybe even multi-dimensional type creatures or something like that? Because I know I've read some people, I don't know whether you would call them researchers, some of them are, I guess, but kind of go into that multiverse type thing. What is your opinion about that?
Yeah, as I said earlier, maybe when you're talking about some of the weirder things like Mothman and Dogman, I think there most definitely could be a paranormal or supernatural element to some of those. Because, and again, not just because of the physical descriptions, which are weird enough, but just the behaviors that are described. Most animals, even large predators like bears and wolves, mountain lions, are very afraid of humans and will always flee from a human and rather than have a confrontation. But in accounts of Mothman and Dogman, there are many accounts of them being hyper-aggressive, chasing people's cars, clawing their windshield, popping up out of the darkness and scaring the crap out of them. That doesn't sound like the behavior of a normal animal. And then there's other weird things, like they vanish into thin air, or there's weird phantom fogs that roll through, and so on and so forth. So I think some of those might be related to the supernatural. It's interesting to me that most of the people that really endorse or advocate those theories are usually people that come from the paranormal field. So we have to acknowledge that there's kind of a cultural influence. We all have biases. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just it means we lean in different directions based on our experiences. And it's understandable that people that are in the paranormal world, that are used to dealing with, apparitions and EVPs and all those really almost supernatural elements, would feel comfortable looking at cryptids, some cryptids in that realm, because that's what their comfort zone. And also the fact that many cryptids can't be found, physically, that makes them seem supernatural because they're so elusive. I don't think that Bigfoot is at all multidimensional, supernatural. People ask me that all the time, and I write about that in my new book. Just because, most people aren't aware that there's a huge database, thousands of Bigfoot sightings that have been chronicled and put in different databases for decades, and 99.9% of those sightings describe very natural encounters with Bigfoot. Somebody's out in the woods, they walk by the river and there's a Bigfoot standing there and drinking water, and it gets up and runs off. Or someone's driving a lonely mountain road and a Bigfoot dashes out in front of the car and crosses the road just like a deer would, So that's, almost all sightings describe just very normal, very natural encounters with an animal. Whereas, it's very rare that you hear about these Bigfoot vanishing into thin air or, getting shot 100 times with, a barrage of bullets and not dying. I mean, there are some of those accounts, but they're pretty darn, in the scope of things, those accounts are pretty rare. So that's what I try to focus on, is the big picture. But I'm a very open-minded person, Rodney, and I have many friends in the paranormal field. I've experienced a couple things through the years, so I think there's something to that. So, perhaps in some cases there might be occasional Bigfoot sightings that are not actual Bigfoot encounters, but maybe people are encountering a paranormal phenomenon that looks like Bigfoot, that manifests in some kind of big hairy thing like the Dogman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, with everyone having a camera, with their phone today, I've noticed that there's not really many good photos or videos that's been displayed as evidence today. Well, what's
true.
your opinion about that? I mean, it seems like back in the 70s and 60s, everybody was getting better video pictures than today.
No, you're right. That is a big problem. And, I have a skeptical side as well. So a lot of times I look at that and I think that's a pretty big problem with some of the cryptids. You would think that someone would have gotten better photos by now. In terms of Bigfoot, I think it probably has adapted a number of behavior patterns that are geared towards avoiding being found, seen by humans. I think they are smart enough to recognize that we are their greatest threat. And it is true also that many animals are sensitive to electromagnetic energy or something that even has the scent of a person on it, if they have a good olfactory. So if you really, what I'm getting to now are like all the trail cams that hunters and outdoorsmen put up, and they get all these fabulous pictures of animals all the time going down the game trail, but never Bigfoot. But so that's one of the reasons people have brought that up. Well, how come no one's got a good trail cam photo of a Bigfoot? Well, maybe they can sense them or know that they're associated with humans. The other thing is, this is kind of an anecdotal thing I like to talk about, but I was out filming with a buddy of mine, Lyle Blackburn, one time. We were shooting a little documentary, coincidentally, about pterodactyl sightings, and we're kind of out there on the edge of Oklahoma City, and all of a sudden this huge friggin' buck, this is in the middle of the afternoon, this huge friggin' buck runs out in the middle of a 4-lane highway, and it's got this really incredible rack. It was really, really startling because you never expect to see a buck like that standing in the middle of a freeway. And Lyle had a cell phone in his hand, and I swear to God, by the time he had it opened up, camera set up, and ready to take a shot, that thing was gone that fast. It ran off into the woods. And so that we kind of both just commented on that man, that we should have had a perfect shot of that animal. It was right there in front of us in the wide open, and in just a few seconds, the opportunity was gone. So, I think even though everyone's got a good camera in their phone these days, if you think about it, particularly if you see something that's scaring you, or something that you're not expecting, or something that's not supposed to exist. Can you imagine if someone walks into a Bigfoot in the woods? They may be so freaked out or so shaken that they can't function as quickly and efficiently as they would otherwise. So that's all I can think of. But you're right. We should have better photos of some of these things, mainly Bigfoot and maybe some of the lake monsters. Now, that said, there are some films that people aren't as familiar with, not so much with Bigfoot. Everyone's seen the Patterson-Gimlin film. I still think that's real, and it's pretty darn convincing, but it's still controversial after all these years. But in terms of lake monsters, there's some good films that have been taken of lake monsters, Loch Ness Monster type things, the Ogopogo in Lake Okanagan, British Columbia, Canada. There are two really compelling pieces of footage there. There's something called the Nash footage, which was shot up in Alaska, that's pretty convincing in terms of a lake monster surfacing. There's something called the Mansi photograph from Lake Champlain in New York, Vermont, that looks like a plesiosaur, a prehistoric reptile sticking its head out of the water. So, Loch Ness Monster, there are a lot of fake photos, and that's something we have to point out, that there seems to, through the years, have been a lot of hoaxing up in Loch Ness. So, I think there's maybe one or two photos there that are compelling. So, there are a few out there, but you're right, man. In terms of the Thunderbirds, which we were just talking about, there's one piece of footage that's kind of controversial, that's not real super convincing, but I've had at least 3 different occasions where people have told me that they had photographs or knew of photographs of Thunderbirds, conclusive proof. And each of those 3 times when I tried to track the photo down, there was always the photo suddenly became as mysterious as Thunderbirds. Well, this guy's got it. He went to Mexico. He'll be back. He doesn't have the internet. Or I can't get in touch with the people, or something like that. So it's like, that's been very frustrating that I can't get my hands on a Thunderbird photograph, even though several people claim they've had them.
Dang. That doesn't surprise me. Mm-mm. What have you ever been on an investigation and either been scared or afraid of whatever you was researching on that location that something bad's getting ready to go down?
Well, my first answer probably isn't as interesting to your listeners, but what I always tell people is, sometimes when you're investigating, particularly in other countries, and you're out in the jungle, which I've been a couple of times, and you run across people in the jungle that have guns, and there's no, it's pretty much no man's land, and there's no law enforcement or anything. Those are the scariest situations to be, and that's happened to some colleagues of mine too that have some guys have gone to Africa and run across guys with machine guns in the jungle and stuff. So those are the scariest. But in terms of encountering like an unknown creature, I've never seen Bigfoot, but I'm convinced that I've been within 40 yards is what I meant to say, of a creature that was in some heavy brush. It grunted at us. We recorded that. We couldn't see it. One guy in our group had a shotgun, and he was going to try to flush it out. And all I had was the video camera with some night vision. And to my credit, I was kind of scared because this thing, whatever it was that was grunting at us, was incredibly loud and powerful. It sounded very big and much like an ape. And I kind of went off to one of the areas where we figured if this thing was going to come out, it was going to come out at the edge of this brush line. And I kind of camped out there with the camera, and that was kind of nerve-wracking because I was unarmed, and I thought this thing is huge and it sounds very aggressive. But I convinced myself that that's my job is to get evidence. So I was there with the movie camera, and if the thing came out of the woods, I was going to get it on film, even though it was the last thing I ever did. So figured I'd be as famous as the guys that filmed the Patterson-Gimlin film if I got this footage of a Bigfoot coming out. But it didn't come out, and we never did see it. We saw some eyes shine and found some other evidence the next morning. It was all pretty compelling. But that was, my adrenaline was pumping when we knew this thing was really right there. I mean, it was one of those, and people that are interested in the paranormal that have encountered, it's one of those things when you encounter something that suddenly your realization is that this is actually happening. This is something that's happening right now in my reality, and I can't explain it or understand it. And you're kind of facing your fears, and it's a bit of an adrenaline rush. But other than that, I've never had any cryptid encounters or anything that terrifying. I've had some close wildlife encounters with bears and things that were a little nerve-wracking, but that's about it.
Okay. Well, without giving too much away, tell us about your new book, The Essential Guide to Bigfoot, and what made you decide to write that book?
Well, that's a good question, because even though I've been a cryptozoologist and I've been investigating Bigfoot for decades, I just never really felt like I had a lot to bring to the table in terms of a whole Bigfoot book, because there are some really excellent, thorough, well-researched books, textbook-style books in the Bigfoot field that are, kind of go-to books. And I guess I was kind of intimidated. How am I going to produce something kind of along those lines? But none of those books have really been written in a number of years, or there haven't been as many written over the past decade or so, 10, 15 years. So there have been a lot of new things that have happened in the field and stuff. But what really compelled me, Rodney, to write the book was that with the proliferation of the internet and social media, I find that Bigfoot has become largely misrepresented. You look at a lot of YouTube videos, and you look at Facebook posts and tweets and podcasts and blogs, all these things, there's a lot of bad information about Bigfoot. I don't know where people get it, if they just read it off other websites or they make it up, but there's a lot of sound foundational information about Bigfoot that we know because it's been investigated for decades by a number of people that spent years and years compiling data and coming up with theories and doing studies. So, I wanted to kind of reintroduce all of that material to the younger generations and people that are new to Bigfoot that really just need the basic information that's very accurate, that's been peer-reviewed and things like that. I also wanted to kind of talk about my own experiences because I've investigated Bigfoot all over the continent, from all the way from the mountains of Alaska down to the jungles of Central America. Yes, there are Bigfoot sightings from the jungles of Central America, Florida, Pacific Northwest, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Texas, Louisiana. I've been everywhere, so I've investigated a lot of Bigfoots. I talk about some of my experiences. I wanted to talk a lot about the social aspects of Bigfoot, not between Bigfoots, but how we as humans perceive the phenomenon and how it's led to like lots of different kind of subcultures and ideologies and things. And there's also a chapter on with just Bigfoot sightings, because everyone loves to read about the sightings and the accounts, and I tried to compile kind of a mixed bag of some of the best, most credible sightings where you had multiple eyewitnesses and long observations in the daylight, things like that, other evidence. And lastly, I did a chapter on something called Littlefoot, which is, again, something that's overlooked, probably because it's little, but there are a lot of sightings and also Native American accounts of the little people, and but not like a gnome or a fairy, but typically described as little hairy people, and something similar to Bigfoot, but a pygmy-sized version, standing only about 3 to 5 feet tall. Some of those sightings may be juvenile Bigfoots, but in other situations, they talk about groups of them or long traditions of them. So Littlefoot gets its own chapter as well. So it's kind of, it opens the door to that possibility that maybe there's more than one species of unknown hominin that's being called Bigfoot, and some of them may actually be kind of small.
I know I've seen a video on YouTube. Looked like some bikers. I can't remember if it was in Asia or South America, but they were riding their dirt bikes, and this little pygmy-looking person shot out of the weeds, ran down the trail for a little ways, and then shot back into the weeds. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that one. My gut feeling is that it's probably like a CGI special effect type thing, because there's the majority of videos, but you don't know. But I lean towards that one not being genuine. But it's interesting because the footage is based on, and if you read the backstory behind where they were supposedly riding their bikes and so on, it's actually based on a real Littlefoot creature that's been reported from that region. So, they didn't just make it up out of the blue. They were trying to, if it was a fake, they were trying to recreate a sighting of a known Littlefoot type creature. I can't remember if it was, I don't think it was Sumatra. It was probably Malaysia or something. There are a number of Littlefoot type creatures that are reported from Indonesia, Malaysia. There's orang pendek and batutut and the bucket taima, monkey man, and so on. So there's a lot of, I guess, a worldwide thing like Bigfoot and the Yeti, where all over the globe you have these accounts of little hairy man-like creatures that are very tiny.
Well, are they any? Do you know if there's any fossil records of any type of Bigfoot or Littlefoot that you know of?
Tons. And that's really one of the best lines of evidence that Bigfoot and Littlefoot could exist, is that things that look like them actually did exist. In terms of Bigfoot, there have been different fossil forms suggested. You have to understand a little bit about the hominin line. Hominins are basically our ancestors, a bushy family tree of, I guess some people would call them ape men. They were really apes, as are we, but they were hair covered, and some of them walked upright like us. And some of the biggest ones were Paranthropus, which was a kind of called an Australopithecine. It lived about 2 million to 1 million years ago in Africa. Looked just like a little Sasquatch, not quite as big, but still pretty big and powerful, just a little shorter. And then, you had Homo heidelbergensis and Homo erectus, which were, other hominins that came later that were pretty widespread. Littlefoot has a lot of possibilities. I think the most suggestible one is something called Homo habilis, which was one of the first hominins discovered. Potentially it was much smarter than the Australopithecines that it descended from. But it was very small. It only stood about 3 feet tall, 3.5 feet tall. And a recent study speculated that Homo habilis may have migrated out of Africa a couple million years ago and spread out all over Asia and maybe even parts of Europe. And the most recent finding was a species called Homo floresiensis, which has affinities that are very similar to Homo habilis. And Homo floresiensis, the fossils were just found in 2013. 2003, which is still very recent. And they were found in Indonesia on a little island called Flores, and this thing only stood about 3 feet tall. It was not human. It was human-like, but not human, based on its studies of its physiology. But it was around as recently as 50,000 years ago. Now, that may sound like a long time to a lot of people, Rodney, but 50,000 years ago for another human species to be around that recently is pretty remarkable. And so the theory then is, could some of these Homo habilis or Homo floresiensis type creatures still be around? And that would explain the Littlefoot accounts. And similar to Bigfoot, maybe it descended from something that was around during the Ice Age, the Pleistocene, and maybe a small number of them managed to survive. And when I say small, I don't mean like a few. I mean thousands, which is what it would take to be around that long. Millions through the years maybe, but. Mm-hmm.
Oh wow. Well, what has your research found amongst, especially the Native Americans here in America, about Bigfoot? What have they told you? What does their ancient stories say?
Well, there are a lot of native traditions that speak of Bigfoot-like creatures, and just like the Thunderbird, the traditions range from Alaska throughout Canada, the Pacific coast, the Appalachians where you're at and stuff. I mean, everywhere. So they have a number of different names that are very difficult to pronounce, but most of them, or many of them, are from the Pacific Northwest, where most Bigfoot sightings coincidentally stem from. In British Columbia, you have something called the Bukwas and the Zonaqua, which are both kind of hairy, wild creature, man-like creatures, wild men as they call them. In Alaska, when I was up there for a while doing research, I found, Arulatak, Urayuli, Gagit, Nantinik, Kushtaka. We've heard of Sasquatch. That's kind of an anglicized version of another name from the Chehalis tribe in British Columbia. In Washington, you have the Sitko or Sihatik, the Skookum, and in California, something called the Oma and the Mayak Datat. So those are just some names, but I mean, there's tons of them, and some people even associate Bigfoot with something called the Wendigo. So yeah, there seem to be many prevalent Native American traditions of Bigfoot-like creatures, and of course, they typically called them wild men, or the translation would mean wild man or bushman. And most Native Americans, I think, often viewed Bigfoot as not an animal so much as a hairy tribe of, and I'm not going to say they were human, but human-like, human enough to where the Native Americans kind of viewed them and respected them as a different tribe that lived very deep in the wilderness. And of course, they were always described as being very big and very hairy. And some of the more colorful stories talk about them kidnapping maiden young maidens and abducting people. Those stories aren't too common, but sometimes. So yeah, another line of evidence that Bigfoot could exist is that we have these widespread Native American traditions of Bigfoot-like creatures, and those go back centuries.
I got into a big debate with a friend of mine about the Native Americans, their stories about the hairy men compared to the redhead giant. And I told him, I said, the Native Americans, I know they knew the difference between a redheaded giant and a hairy man. And he wanted to say that they were one and the same. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I haven't done as much research into the traditional. I know of the red-headed giants you speak of from a specific cave in Nevada, and there are other accounts of similar. There are many accounts from Native America of giant human-like skeletons being found, usually bigger than Bigfoot, sometimes 10 feet tall, oftentimes with double rows of teeth, which is really weird, and oftentimes with red hair, but. I haven't done as much research in that area. There are guys like Hugh Newman that have written books and are pretty well schooled in that. I think in some cases there could be crossover, that maybe some of the giant human-like skeletons that have been found could have been Bigfoots. I'm not sure I support the conspiracy theories that the Smithsonian has these giant skeletons and they're hiding them and stuff. But we have to acknowledge, Rodney, there's in the field of zoology, you have people that are lumpers and people that are splitters. And in terms of like different animal species, something we call taxonomy, there are some zoologists that like to lump all animals that are similar together, like mountain lions, and say, well, it's a mountain lion, even though this mountain lion in Canada looks different than the mountain lion in Florida. A mountain lion's a mountain lion. And then there are the splitters, the people that say, well, the mountain lion in Florida is distinct enough that we're going to give it its own subspecies and we're going to say that it's different and distinct. So what I'm trying to say is it's kind of a metaphor for how people look at things in general in any types of research. And so there are people in cryptozoology and paranormal and stuff that lump different phenomenon or different things that are reported together and look at it as one thing with different facets, and then there are other people that kind of split them apart and say, well, this is a poltergeist is different than a ghost is different than a demon, and so on and so forth. So I guess a lot of it just has to do with perspective, but truthfully, we don't really know. Now, the one thing I would say about Bigfoot is that based on the descriptions of its morphology and specifically its skull, people always say that Bigfoot kind of has a receding skull on top, like it kind of slants backwards, and they have this cone on the back of their head, which is similar to like fossil hominins that had kind of a sloping head. Whereas Homo sapiens, our species, we've got this big bulbous cranium in the front of our head because our brain is so darn big. So if you look at, any anthropologist worth his salt can look at a skull pretty quickly and say that's a Homo sapiens skull, or that's something more primitive that's not Homo sapiens. And I think most of the giant skeletons that I've heard about, described, and seen photographs of even though they're huge, they have that Homo sapiens cranium that looks like they have a very large brain. So that wouldn't be similar to Bigfoot.
Okay. Well, one more before I let you go. Do you think the government or world governments, may have more information about Bigfoot and other cryptids that they're hiding from the public?
I talk about that in the book too, because that is something that people discuss or want to know about. First off, I'll say that I'm not necessarily a big conspiracy person. I don't. A lot of conspiracies that have been proposed, particularly with regard to Bigfoot, are just pretty sensational. And not to get political, but if you look at the current dysfunction that's going on with our government, I mean, it's hard to imagine that the government would be able to conceal a body or, something really earth-shattering like that. However, I think there is a suppression of. Sorry, I don't know if that was humorous. Or
To me, it was humorous because I'm a big political person, so
yeah,
it's funny because
say, oh, the government's doing this. It's like, dude, the government, look at them. Yeah, but the other thing is, I do think that it's possible that some government agencies perhaps have more information about Bigfoot than they're leading on, because they realize what a huge crisis it would create if they were suddenly, imagine if they were suddenly to announce, okay, everyone stay calm, but there's a race of giant, hairy, human-like creatures that live in the woods all over the continent. They're about 8 feet tall. We don't know a lot about them, but people would, it would create a huge panic. You'd get armed vigilantes running through the woods. You'd have breakdowns in the social structure and different things. So it would create chaos, and law enforcement would be overwhelmed. There'd be all these problems and issues. So if they did have more evidence, I can understand why they would suppress that. One of the things I talk about in the book is that I once spoke to a gentleman who did his training up there in Georgia. What's that great base up there in northern Georgia? I can't remember, but it's in a heavily forested area. And he swears to me that his field training manual, this was years ago, back in the 70s or 80s, that his field training manual had a specific instruction or procedure on how to deal with a Bigfoot if you ran across one in the woods there. How, not to confront it, don't shoot it, do this, and this. So, of course, he didn't have a copy of this particular manual, and I haven't been able to track one down, but you hear stories like that where people talk about Bigfoot being mentioned in official manuals and classified documents and things. So, it's possible. I could see why they would cover some of it up, but again, I'm not convinced that they actually have a body or a skull or anything mind blowing like that, and that they're keeping it guarded in a hidden bunker somewhere. That just seems a bit much.
I'd like to apologize. We got cut off, and right before we was getting ready to end the show, but I was going to ask him what Ken was going to do for the rest of the year and for 2020. But I guess we'll find out next year. I'll get him back on as soon as I can. Again, I apologize. Sometimes Blog Talk is a pain in the butt, and it cuts people off at some of the damnedest times. But if you want more information about Ken, he has a Facebook page. Also, if anybody's interested in getting his book, I'll put a link down at the bottom. So everyone, that'd be a great Christmas gift for any Bigfoot enthusiast. But I want to thank Ken for understanding what happened and putting up with me. Especially, it seems like I always have the technical problems more than anybody. But again, I want to thank you, Ken, for coming on the show. I have nothing but respect for you and the job you're doing. I welcome you back anytime, my friend. Love to get you back on. I have a ton more questions to ask you. Like I said, I'll add the link to below, so in case anybody wants to get a copy of his book or other books, he's got a few more books out there. But our guest for our Christmas special guest for next Thursday will be Miranda Young. She's returning. We didn't get to speak too much the first time she was on, but y'all get a chance. We'll be on December 19th, same time, 10 p.m. To 12 a.m. So everyone have a good night. Have a great weekend, and stay safe. And thank you for your understanding under the circumstances. And thanks a lot. That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also, to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services, thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube, look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you, You, the people, have the power. The power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!